Well, we're very excited to be joined by Mr. Darren Korb. Darren, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Not a problem.
So Darren, I guess just to start, I think, it's kind of an interesting story. I know as far as how you got involved into this crazy industry that we call the video game industry. Do you want to talk a little bit about, how you stumbled into this industry?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's I really just lucked into it, honestly. I mean, I growing up, I was really good friends with this guy named Amir Rao. And, in 2009, he came to me and said, hey, I'm, co-founding this game studio. Do you want to do all the music and audio for it? And I said, of course I do. And that was it. That's it. There's no, nothing else.
What's so cool is something that makes me just kind of very proud of the video game community, and just as far as the way people have been looking at video game music, it really makes me happy that the two soundtracks that you've worked on have both been sort of critically acclaimed, and they seem to be very well loved and popular in the video game community, and that's a great thing because they're very novel and unique soundtracks in the world of game music, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. We're definitely thrilled with the response, and people have been really enthusiastic about both soundtracks. Bastion for sure, and then Transistor so far, the response has been really positive. So it's definitely incredible. I mean, to hear people and see people respond that way for sure.
Yeah, one thing that we're so interested in and kind of we want to talk about today is your background is so different from most game composers because you're just one of these guys that plays in bands. You're just a musician first and foremost that happens to compose games. And I think that's what's so refreshing about your music is that it doesn't really sound like video game music. It just sounds like music. So I guess something that I would like to talk is a little bit of your background. Like, when did you first get into music?
I mean, I've been singing since I was a little kid. I did like musical theater when I was a tiny kid, from 5 years old on pretty much. And I always enjoyed that. And then I never really I started playing. I mean, I took some piano lessons as a little kid, never got into it. And then around the time I was like 11 or 12, I started learning to play guitar and then really got into music.
Right.
After that, I hope that's my son, by the way, making those baby sounds. I hope you don't mind.
No worries.
Oh no, I think he wants us to interview him also.
He does. He does.
Shout out to Corby Jr. over there.
Yes. His name is Milo. He's
Milo.
Good little dude.
What up, Milo?
Yep.
Yeah, so when did you first start playing in bands, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, pretty shortly after that. I mean, I started my first band I was in was actually with Amir Rao. He was the drummer.
Oh my gosh.
Cool. We were 12 years old. We played I think our first gig was like our 7th grade dance or something.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
has he played on any of the Bastion or Transistor stuff?
He hasn't. I actually haven't really used pretty much any live percussion for any of the Bastion Transistor stuff. Yeah, that's partially due to recording constraints. Like I record in my apartment. I don't really have a good way to record drums here.
Right. I guess one of the interesting things about, I think one people really loved about Bastion and definitely with Transistor as well, is the fusion of kind of different genres coming together, rock, almost Americana, techno, electronic elements. Mm-hmm. What do you think is your biggest source of inspiration when you sit down to compose music for these games? As far as genre-wise, is there a specific group or composer that really resonates with you, or are you just trying to do something that you think fits the emotional tone?
The primary thing is fitting the tone emotionally, and then figuring out how to get there. I definitely look at a lot of different artists. I mean, on Bastion, everything from Led Zeppelin to Jeff Buckley,
right,
and all sorts of stuff in between. Was a big influence on me, and on this project on Transistor, I definitely listened to a lot of Imogen Heap, a lot of Radiohead, a lot of Bjork and things like that, and looked at a lot of different types of stuff, even like Nada Surf.
Yeah, one of the cool things we noticed when we listened to, by the way, we just really enjoyed the Transistor soundtrack. It's just a great job on that. One cool thing is very, very different, obviously, from Bastion, a little bit darker, a little bit more electronic. But one thing that is so cool is, we do hear some of the same drum sounds coming back again. And what's cool is it's we've only heard these two soundtracks from you, but it feels like two is already a pattern, where now it's this feels like classic Darren Korb.
Great.
Awesome.
And I think one of my favorite things is I love that you talked about sort of that you have a limited way of recording because you have a very kind of advanced and unique production sound, which I think gives such a distinct style to your music. And I think it's something that's like kind of inspirational to a lot of amateur composers out there. And I remember this is something that you mentioned when we talked to you at MagFest, but I really like how there's sort of you give an intentional level of kind of grit and distortion to all of your instrument sounds so that any kind of fakeness within the virtual instruments or the samples, it makes it sound so intentional, and it's really cool. And I love thinking that you're just doing it all in your apartment.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you again. I mean, yeah, that's definitely an important thing to me. I mean, I know that if I hear a canned sound that sounds canned, I'll have a negative reaction, just when I'm listening to a piece of music and I'm distracted by the fakeness of something,
Right.
But I've found that, yeah, I mean, if you make it a sound, like a specific choice instead of just a fake sample sound, then it can fit a specific role in the piece and not just sound like a distracting kind of canned instrument.
Oh, absolutely. Like one aspect of that I just noticed and I really loved in Transistor is the song Sandbox, where it's going for that kind of steel guitar sound. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, what did you actually use for that? It sounds sort of like a slide guitar. What instrument did you actually use to create that?
I just played electric guitar with a slide, just like a regular electric guitar with a slide for that.
Right.
I tried my best to sort of approximate that sort of steel guitar, lap guitar kind of sound, with the tools I had available to me.
But what I love about that is, to me, it almost felt like an intention to avoid having like a real steel guitar, because it meshed in with kind of the thing you were talking about, like the approximation of it, where it still kind of has a little bit of that more garage sound to it, while it's able to kind of have this like tropical kind of surf feel with the steel guitar, but it's not like 100% like a really expensive sounding produced steel guitar. It still fits in with everything.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly that for my purposes. I really want to just sort of imply different things,
Right.
Almost more important than that is I want it to sort of tie together with everything else. So I guess the production aesthetic is one way that all these kind of disparate pieces can tie together to some degree.
Yeah, so I think one of the very unique things about your music, as far as when you're talking about Western game music, you do hear this sometimes, in Japanese stuff, but is your use of recorded vocals, having these like almost like rock or pop songs in the soundtrack, which people really seem to resonate with. Is that something that was early on in the project? Was that other people's idea that we really want to have these kind of songs, or is that just something that it was kind of your idea to incorporate that kind of music?
I think that just sort of developed out of the way a lot of things develop for us at Supergiant, which is like, what are our abilities on the team? Like, what can we do? Yeah. And my background, I'm comfortable in songwriting. That's sort of where my background is, and so and production and stuff like that. So I felt excited to try and include some more songs, especially in Transistor that were more in sort of genres that I, in my real life as a musician, a little bit more closer to. The stuff in Bastion was a little bit more kind of folky and spare than a lot of the stuff that I do, like for myself.
Right.
If that makes sense. So, Transistor soundtrack, I think probably in that way a little bit more personal in terms of what I'm interested in outside of games to some degree.
So another question that I'm so curious, Ashley Barrett, I believe her name is, provided really beautiful vocals on both of the projects. What's your relationship with Ashley?
She's just a friend from San Jose. I mean, where we all grew up. Amir grew up there, and I grew up there, and actually Logan Cunningham grew up there as well. We were both living in New York at the time, and I didn't really know her when we both lived in the Bay Area, and we had a mutual friend, we both did theater with or something growing up. Mm-hmm. And I needed some help on a project before I was working on Bastion, and she came and sang for me and did a great job. So I thought of her for Bastion, and yeah, I mean, that just went so well that we continue to work together and we have a good time.
Step out beyond the edge and start the motion. Look out precision, just collision. It's all arranged. Too late for me, no reason to recover.
Oh yeah, and then you guys just sound so beautiful on that credits theme from Bastion.
Yeah, the variation of Mother I'm Here, I love it. It's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, something that I appreciated about Transistor is as far as sort of the instrumental stuff, it definitely felt very much a departure from Bastion, but all really cool stuff. But what I liked is some of the vocal songs. You have such a wonderfully distinct sense of songwriting, and just having Ashley back to do the vocals, it almost made it feel like a spiritual successor to the Bastion kind of musical legacy.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I mean, one challenge on this project for sure, being our kind of sophomore effort, was trying to carve out. We weren't doing a sequel, and we didn't want it to be like more of the same, and so that was a challenge for us, trying to figure out kind of where to tread, in terms of balancing between something totally new and something that you could identify as being from the same team of people who made Bastion, And so I'm happy to hear you say that, because that's definitely something that I thought would positively, not necessarily remind people of Bastion, but just, you can hear that it's the same hands. It's like I sort of thought of, when we were working on this project, I sort of thought of it like, maybe it's like we're such a small team, we're like the size of some bands, so it's almost like a new album from a band, it's, you don't want to repeat yourself, but you want to have it sound like you still.
Absolutely.
Was sort of what part of the way I thought about it anyway.
Well, and then talking to that, I'm curious, we've sort of talked a little bit about the differences between Bastion and Transistor and sort of how they were resulted, but when you were still working in both of them, what was the difference in the way that you approached working on Bastion to the way you worked on Transistor, both as far as the genre and as far as when you were working on Transistor, you had the experience of already having worked on a game. So what was sort of the difference in your approach between those two games?
For Bastion, right away, we had this tonal idea right at the beginning of the project, and we just sort of went and made stuff like right away and just sort of ran with it as best we could from the beginning. And so, I sort of found what I wanted to do with Bastion. That frontiersy thing kind of made it pretty easy to decide which direction I wanted to go, because it's such an identifiable thing that I could stick a pin on the board and sort of make everything revolve around that in some way,
Right.
For Transistor, I definitely struggled more trying to find what I wanted it to sound like, and I think part of that was because there was less of a, like an easy kind of catchphrase for me to describe what we wanted the tone to be. We were trying to create our own thing a little bit more. There were, fewer kind of tropes that we relied on this time around, I think. And so that was one challenge for me, trying to just hone in on what we wanted it to sound and feel like. So it took me quite a bit longer this time around. I mean, I probably made 6 or 7 pieces before I really found it,
Right.
Oh, really?
And I think that makes sense why this feels more personal to you, because it's something that, you kind of really had to dig deeper to probably achieve.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt that I had to. I mean, and so there's that. And then also, just this whole sophomore effort thing is always like that's definitely like, that's not made up, it's like a real looming kind of pressure. And I didn't really know, I'd never experienced anything like that before, because I've made plenty of stuff, but before Bastion, nobody cared about any of it. So the fact that there were people kind of excited about, the Bastion had been so well received, and the fact that people were really excited about this thing certainly added a lot of pressure for me. I felt it and tried to ignore it the best I could. But I definitely kept in mind when I was making the music for this game, like, well, I don't want to repeat Bastion. I don't just want to do the same thing I did on Bastion, and I want to try and make this a brand new thing as much as possible. So that definitely was like an added constraint that both gave me a little bit like more direction and also made it a little bit harder at the same time on this project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Another thing that I think is so interesting about the tone of the music, and we haven't played the game, we're not super into RPGs, so I think it'd be kind of hard for us to, to get into it, but just judging from the music, we're very curious to see, how it's incorporated in the game. A track like The Spine, one thing that I think is so interesting is that I get elements of like a secret agent, like that almost sounds like a Bond song to me.
Cool.
Do you want to like talk a little
bit?
bit about like how that's incorporated emotionally in the game?
Yeah, that occurs. You hear that song first, like pretty early in the game, where you're sort of learning a little bit about what happened to the main character, to Red, before, and she, you come upon a big poster of herself. She comes upon a big poster of herself from before all this happened, when she was a singer, and her voice. She no longer has voice, right? And so it's kind of a somber moment. And there's sort of like a little mini boss kind of fight that happens there, sort of. I mean, it's not really boss, but it's a tougher enemy that first time you encounter. It's a tough enemy. And so yeah, it's definitely, as far as tonally, I wanted to try and do something that was definitely darker and more somber. And, one of the influences for me working on this project, we definitely had a little bit of a noir sort of influence.
Oh, that's cool.
And I feel like that tone is a little bit expressed in The Spine, I think.
Yeah, it's something that I've really noticed that I really like about the games is they have sort of kind of differing art styles between Bastion and Transistor. I'm kind of curious, just because you said it was like a small group over at Supergiant.
Yep.
What were sort of the conversations about developing the aesthetics of the entire game between Bastion and Transistor? And because I'm sure that had effect on the music, or maybe did the music have an effect on the way that the art was sort of portrayed in the games?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think really the difference mainly is process. Like for Bastion, the team just started out as basically Amir and Gavin working on this little gray box thing and making a little prototype. And we didn't really have an artist for almost an entire year of the project.
Right.
And Jen came on, and as soon as she came on, we were like, all right, make all the art now and don't iterate on anything. So she basically, we already had the idea, we already had the concept. She just had to kind of go. And so I love the art in Bastion. I think it's beautiful. But this time, Jen was on the project from the very beginning and was able to really sort of define, the voice of what the game is going to look like, really define the palette. And also, on this project, we had a 3D artist on team who did all the character models and the animation. And we also had an effects artist, Camilo Vanegas and Josh Barnett. Jen was able to really do really an incredible job this time around defining the visual kind of voice of the game.
Yeah, another last thing I just wanted to talk about with as far as Transistor goes is one interesting thing that I noticed on my first listen to the soundtrack was some very unique polyrhythms that I heard mainly in the percussion. Like, for example, on the track Vanishing Point, I noticed that the beat changes between this kind of 12/8 feel while the 4/4 is still going on with the rest of the instruments, and then the beat goes back to 4/4. It's a very interesting thing. It really hits you in the face. What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I was fascinated by the idea, given sort of the more computer-y themes of this game, to try and do some more kind of mathy stuff with the music and try to use some strange time signatures and add tension to the pieces by using kind of uncomfortable time signatures that sometimes fought against each other, like over the top of one another. And I had a lot of fun playing around with that stuff. I mean, a few pieces. Gateless is one where I really tried to play that up. It's in 5/4, and then the B section is like, it's like a 3-beat pattern over 5/4 that's like really uncomfortable, which I really, it tickles my music nerd funny bone a little bit. So.
So I guess the last thing, I think something that's very related, obviously, to your work in these games is just your work in your band. Do you want to talk a little bit about the band or bands that you're in and kind of your compositional contributions to those projects?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm in a band right now called Control Group, and we actually are releasing an album at the end of summer and just released our single today and a video.
Oh, awesome.
So that's up online.
That's timely.
Yeah. And yeah, that project is a lot of fun, and it's really different for me from, composing for games, because, that project is a 3-piece where everybody writes and sings and we all switch instruments, so we all chip in and it's very free, and we just kind of make whatever we feel like making, and there's not a lot of rules, and it's really, it's a lot of fun for us. And for me, it's a really nice kind of departure from what I do on games, because that's sort of just me alone in a room with headphones and in the dark, just trying to figure some stuff out. So it's really nice to have really fun collaborators on the control group stuff.
Have you noticed any fans of your game were kind of making the leap and checking out some of your band?
Some, a handful, not a ton. I mean, I wondered about that when people started to get interested in Bastion, if people would then be interested in some other stuff I was doing, and I guess the short answer is like not really, but maybe someday, we'll see. I mean, the music is pretty different, so if people are a fan of like the type of music I'm doing for games, it is a different thing. This is like a more kind of 90s garage rock type of vibe, than the game music stuff is.
Which is great though, because I could just imagine you so excelling in that.
But and what's funny you say that is because that's one of the things that we notice so much about your songwriting, particularly in the vocal songs, is we did kind of notice that 90s sensibility.
Just as far as some of the chord choices and stuff of being that inspiration, and that's something I really love about your music.
Who are some of your favorite bands?
I mean, I love Radiohead, especially like 90s Radiohead.
Right.
I've been really getting into Imogen Heap these days.
She's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, she's super rad, and I really like the first two Weezer albums were like a really important influence on me. Specifically those two, and sort of after that I stopped paying attention.
Yeah.
But I really love those albums, and the Pixies are a big influence on me, and Jeff Buckley, and a lot of 90s stuff I really enjoy for sure. And then of course there's a bunch of other stuff, but yeah, I mean, and even more recently I've been, well, not that recently, but more recently I've gotten into other 90s bands that at the time were like a little too heavy for me or whatever. Like I've gotten into Soundgarden, I've gotten into all sorts of other stuff that I really enjoy. And for, when I was a kid, I like wasn't as into stuff that was more intense or whatever as I am now.
Something I'm curious, because now you're working in this medium of video game music. Did you play games a lot as a kid?
Oh, absolutely,
Did you like video game music as a kid? Was it ever something you paid attention to?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've always really enjoyed video game music. I played games my whole life, and when I was a little kid, I mean, I was probably about 5 or something when I played Marble Madness for the first time on the NES, and that game, I really was the first time I noticed video game music as being like, whoa, what is this? This is crazy.
I've
never heard anything that sounds like this, and I was really sort of blown away by that as a little kid. And of course, the Mario stuff is all fun, and I enjoyed all that music and everything. But the thing that really, the first thing that made an impression on me was the Marble Madness NES music, and then games like Fallout and Fallout 2. Was another time I really had the music made a big impression. Dungeon Keeper, the original Dungeon Keeper.
Right.
That game has like awesome music, really creepy and atmospheric, and it's kind of like a balance between like weird atmospheric sound effects, like ambient sound effects, and music that kind of comes and goes, and it's a really fascinating approach to music that they had in that game. I took the CD-ROM and I burned it, and I the first track is the game, right, and all the other tracks are the music on those old Windows 95 CD. And I put it in my car and I drive around, listen to Dungeon Keeper music, which is like, I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, I loved it.
I love that. Something I think is so cool about the state of where games have really come as far as their technical advancements is that we notice a lot of more modern video game soundtracks where there is less of a distinction between maybe aesthetically sort of like the sound of what film music can be and the sound of what video game music can be. But I'm really happy at the point where we are, where a game can sort of have the sound that you do, which to me is much more nuanced and almost minimal than something I've ever heard in a game. It's something that I feel like is really cool, and to me it marks an impressive turning point in where we've really come as a medium.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I mean, there were two main kind of factors when I started doing music for games for me, which was I wanted to do something kind of different from what I'd heard before, because it had been done and I wanted to try a new thing. So, I remembered hearing like a lot of orchestral type music in games. I remember hearing like kind of hard kind of rock music in games, and I remember hearing like a lot of electronic type music in games, and I wanted to do something that wasn't really any of those three things specifically, and was maybe something else, or used elements of some of that stuff, but really wasn't just one thing, which I thought a lot of games tended to do.
Right.
Was my opinion at that time. So that was one factor. The other factor was, what can I do like at home in my apartment by myself? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I can't record an orchestra, and I don't want to use fake orchestra sounds because they won't sound good. So, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to build
Right.
a piece on just that stuff. So what can I do here that is going to sound like it wasn't made in somebody's closet, or you know what I mean? That I'll be able to sell with some production detail, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I love the emphasis that you put on the importance of production, because I think it's something that's really kind of truly inspiring, because it sort of says, well, it doesn't necessarily matter if you have a lot of money for these big expensive things. It's like, as long as you really sell the things that you have and make it sound intentional
And play to your strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really important to me. You know, I interned for a few years in a recording studio and have like a production background. You know, I've produced some people and stuff before, and that's really something that's a lot of fun for me, and also something that you know, working in that recording studio, one thing that it did for me that I think is pretty interesting is it gave me the confidence to not need a recording studio, if that makes sense. Like, I would go in the recording studio, and they have all this nice gear, and they have all these people there, and who know what they're doing, and whatever, and you record, and you have everybody's watching their clock, you know, and it's expensive and whatever, and then you leave with a product that's it, unless you pay a bunch more money to stay longer, you know. And I just feel like the ability to spend all the time you need to make something good, you know, and to really pay attention to the details, the ability to do that is sort of almost more valuable in a lot of cases, depending on the kind of music, than an expensive studio with a bunch of outboard gear and fancy microphones and all that stuff. I mean, those are tools, right? And the thing that is important about a tool is how you use it. So if you don't have enough time or the bandwidth or the whatever, if you don't have the ability to use those tools in a way that's going to make the most of them, then what's the point, you know?
Absolutely. No. The last thing I kind of wanted to ask you, as far as the game world, is because of the success of these two soundtracks, and maybe this has already happened for you, I'm not sure, but would you be interested if people were to offer you other projects that they heard your music and really like your style, and maybe they wanted you to work in a larger scale with, you know, at a studio or doing other projects other than Supergiant? Would you ever be interested in that?
Well, theoretically, you know, the thing is, I'm a member of the team at Supergiant. I'm a full-time Supergiant employee, so I have a full-time job. So
right,
basically, so taking on like a whole other game project is something that I don't know that I would do necessarily, unless it was like a dream, some sort of dream project. Then I could talk to the team about it maybe. But again, really, I think I love what I do at Supergiant. I love that I kind of get to do what I do without constraints, and I'm sort of in charge of this aspect of the project, and it's really awesome to be able to feel that way and to just have sort of creative freedom. You know, any other job that I took would be a situation where, you know, there's a client who hires me, you know, and I have to make the thing that they ask me for, which, you know, when I've been approached about that has been, can you just make more Bastion music? You know, basically, I'm doing a Western game. Can you make Bastion music for it? You know? So, you know, again, it's not really appealing to me, you know, cause I've done that, and, you know, I'm, you know, I like making it for Bastion, but again, it's not really the same thing, you know, just sort of trying to copy myself is a different type of project.
Yeah, and also I think there's so many reasons why it feels like you're in such a place that it's so lucky and it's so rare. I get the sense that you don't have to really answer as much to, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is true. Like, maybe you show a piece to the other members and they're like, oh, I really don't like this, and you have to change it. But more often than not, if you really like something, is that just kind of what ends up going forward?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, you know, we at Supergiant, you know, we don't have a lot of redundancy, you know, so we have me doing pretty much all the audio stuff, and you know, Jen is sort of in charge of the art, even though she has some people, you know, now helping out, and Greg is basically in charge of the writing, and Amir edits for him, and then Amir and Greg do level design together. So there's not a lot of, like, we kind of trust the person who's in charge of that discipline, you know. Jen makes, you know, we can all give feedback on the art, but if Jen loves something, I mean, of course, it'll go in the game, you know, like, you know, it's like, I think it's sort of the way it is with every discipline. If someone's like really passionate about a thing in their court, then that's sort of like a trump thing for the most part, I think.
Right.
Because we all trust each other and know that, you know, the person, Jen, is better at art than I am for sure, and has a better, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to I have no reason to impose my opinion about some art thing. I mean, and truth be told, I love everything she makes. So, so there's never been a time when I've been like, oh no, we should be the different, you know?
Yeah.
So we don't really run into that a lot. I mean, I definitely take notes from people, you know, if people have comments about a piece, I will, you know, definitely take them into consideration and do another pass of the mix or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why, at least so far, these two soundtracks have been so kind of pure and have been so successful is because your vision is never really filtered down. I think one of
It's uncompromised.
One of the hard things about working in a larger group is you're going to have to make compromises. You're going to have to talk to other team members and be like, oh, actually, I don't like this, and maybe a programmer wants it to be a certain way. And I think that's what you're so lucky at Supergiant is that it feels like you're able to just have a vision and just move forward with it. And I think that's one of the reasons those soundtracks
Well,
are
and I
so
think
great.
also we're lucky as the game players and as just people listening to the soundtracks as well of being able to have something that does feel very novel because these soundtracks are incredibly unique, and I think that's why people are really gravitating towards them, and they really resonate with people. And I've also noticed even people who haven't played the games and people who aren't really gamers, you know, when I've showed them these soundtracks, they really respond to them just on a musical basis. And I think that's it's a big accomplishment, and I think it is in testament to the way you guys run Supergiant.
Yeah, I mean, thanks again. I mean, that really is, you know, pretty surreal to hear how positive response has been to these soundtracks. And you know, I of course, I think the soundtrack has more meaning and works even better when you play the game. But I mean, I really appreciate that people are you know, are able to enjoy it regardless. And that's really exciting for me, for sure.
Awesome. Well, the last question we have to ask, I don't know how much you can divulge, but what are your guys' next plans as far as future projects? Anything you can talk about?
I can honestly tell you that we don't know at all. We have no idea. I am not hiding anything when I say we don't know at all. We've been so focused. Is that right, Milo? We've been so focused on getting Transistor out the door and just supporting it and taking care of all that stuff that we really have no clue what's next. And as soon as things kind of die down a little bit from this, then we'll start to talk about it. But until then, we really, it's just all about supporting Transistor, and that's all we have on our mind at the moment.
Well, that's great. We'd had a wonderful time talking with you, Darren. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And
Yeah, no
we
problem.
look forward to more games and more soundtracks.
Awesome.
Well, Milo, I hope you have a good day as well.
Yeah, he certainly will. He's gonna drool a little bit and then pee and yeah.
Sounds like a blast.
Yep.
Well, thanks again, Darren. We look forward to your future work and wish you the best of luck.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.